Hey everybody, Coach Toolshed here. Happy New Year's. Today is New Year's Day, and I want to take a look back today as we start the 20s. And I want to take a look back at the previous decade at the developer that I feel is far and away the top developer from the previous decade, and a developer that all other companies at this point should look at as an example of how to be successful and maintain quality and consistency while also pleasing critics and the fans, and without being greedy with microtransactions and gouging their customers every step of the way, because it is possible. And I want to take a look today at From Software, a company which I feel is undoubtedly and irrefutably the top AAA game developer of the last decade. Now, before you grab your torch and pitchfork and start coming after me, let me try to make a reasonable and rational explanation for why I think that this company is clearly the best developer that we've seen in the last decade. Some of you might disagree, but let me try to make my case. So, first off, can you name another developer that has released 5 to 6 games in the last decade? That's a AAA studio that has released 5 to 6 AAA games of high quality that have gotten great critical reviews and great fan reception for the last decade. I think for starters you're going to find trouble doing that, because if we include Demon Souls, which launched just at the tail end of 2009, and you don't even have to include that if you don't want. If you think that's cheating, that's fine, but even still, you have Dark Souls 1, Dark Souls 2, and including the revamped edition, which Miyazaki worked on to sort of correct some of the mistakes of that game, and they launched the Scholar of the First Sin edition. They also had Dark Souls 3, Bloodborne, and Sekiro, which just recently won the Game of the Year award, if you care about stuff like that, for 2019. So over the course of the decade, they're putting out a game of high quality every 2 to 3 years, which just is a pace that no other company has been keeping up with. That's a pace that we saw back in previous decades, where game companies would put out games constantly every 2 years, but most AAA companies do not do that anymore. We have to wait 3, 4, 5 years. In the case of some games, like Elder Scrolls, we're waiting over a decade in between proper game releases. But with the Soulsborne series of games that From Software makes, you know every 2 to 3 years you are going to get another entry in the series, and we already know that they have another one in the works called Elden Ring, which is very much looking forward to. We don't know if that's coming next year or maybe the year after, but that is coming down the line pretty soon. And unlike many other games coming from different developers over the next couple of years, I have little to no question that Elden Ring is going to be another great game from Software. I don't have a question in my mind. I'm not cynical about them, because they have, over the last decade, proven to consistently release full finished games. Now, sometimes they've had some frame rate issues, but for the most part, their games released in a proper state. Earlier this year, or I guess earlier last year, we had Sekiro came out with little to no bugs. Sure, you had some hiccups here and there, but the game launched in a fully functional state. Didn't even come out with any DLC, and it's a full, fleshed out game. No microtransactions, no loot boxes of any kind, and that has also been a staple for From Software over the last decade. You will see no in-game stores. You will see no cosmetic items. Whereas a lot of other developers these days are trying to gouge you, charging $5, $10, $18 for individual skins in a $60 game. From Software doesn't do that. They don't try to nickel and dime you, and most of their games offer tons of cosmetic items. You can equip all sorts of different outfits in your game, all sorts of different weapons, and they don't charge you a dime for any of it. No, companies just don't do that these days for the most part, especially games that have online components, which this game also does. And we're going to get into that for a minute, but think of the fact, how many online games and how many developers do you know in the AAA space that have online gaming that do not try to charge you to keep the servers running, that don't try to charge you for network upkeep and all the other nonsense, and don't make excuses for it, and don't try to tell you that, oh, we won't be able to keep this running unless you guys pay us extra money. And they still, Demon Souls just went offline recently this year, and that's on an old system. All sorts of PS3 games are getting shut down right now, and so Demon Souls got shut down earlier this year after or again, last year, but it was after a decade of being up and running. When we see some games nowadays getting shut down after a year or two of service, and in some extreme cases, within days or weeks, in some cases, for From Software to keep the servers running and not be dipping into your pockets constantly over the years looking for extra money, it's something to be commended, because that is almost unique in the AAA space. Let's also take into account the fact that single-handedly From Software has created and perfected a very popular genre of game, what is now called the Souls-like genre. And you'll see all sorts of different developers trying to copy this formula these days, including we just saw EA try to copy it with Jedi the Fallen Order. People are talking about how the combat is very much like a cheap rip-off Souls-like almost. And the fact is, no one still, to this day, aside from Nioh, which got close, but no one has really compared to what From Software has done in this genre. If you combine the level design and the world design and the lore and the world building and all of the different bosses, and you take the orchestral music that plays during the boss fights and the art design and everything that goes into this game, there still is no other developer that has gone into the Souls-like genre that has come close to doing what From Software has. Again, Nioh is the rare exception that came close, but I would still put Nioh below all of the From Software games. I actually do like Nioh too, but that's besides the point. Let's also look at something that I mentioned briefly earlier, which is that From Software innovated a completely unique style of multiplayer gameplay, where you can both leave messages for people in other worlds, words of encouragement, or you can try to trick them into maybe going into a trap or falling off an edge of a cliff somewhere. You can point them to hidden treasure or secret rooms or secret paths, or maybe help them along the way, give them a tip for a boss fight that they're coming up against. You can also invade other people's worlds or be invaded yourself and have your progress blocked by an actual player, something that is very unique. So we've seen some other games try to copy that since then, but again, nobody has quite mastered that both co-op and player PvP invasions type of gameplay that the From Software games offer. Say you have a new friend to the game and they've never played the games before and you want to help them out. Well, you can go into their world and guide them along the way if you want, or you can just accompany them as a companion along the way, give them helpful pointers, maybe help them out of a jam. Maybe you get invaded and you do the duel for them so that they can continue on their way even if you die. It's something that is just unique in the gaming space, and even though there's other games that have done this since, I still have not found any game where I felt quite the same way as with the From Software games. It's something I did miss in Sekiro just a little bit, I will say, and I hope that they go back to that in their next game. But moving on, and something that has to get pointed out, something that I feel is very important, even aside from the games themselves, and that is the public persona and the public image of From Software. And Miyazaki, the guy who is the director of all this, the guy who created these games, and unlike some other guys who take the credit for creations that aren't actually theirs, Howard, Miyazaki actually created this stuff himself, and you don't hear his name very much. And the reason why is because the guy does not self-promote all the time. He's very humble. He's very quiet. He does not go out and seek out the limelight. He doesn't travel the globe telling people how great he is and hobnobbing with Hollywood celebrities and telling Western audiences that if they don't like his games, that they just don't get it. You go back and play your first-person shooters. He doesn't come out on stage at E3 in a cloud of smoke and make false promises and try to sell you his games with cheap sales pitches and lies like some other people. He doesn't go on to Twitter and make a fool out of himself and get himself wrapped up into lawsuit after lawsuit like some other CEOs that we see. From Software handles themselves, for the most part, with a little bit of dignity, which is also, for many ways, unique in the AAA space. You don't see them having a lot of PR nightmares. You don't see their name getting dragged through the mud. You don't see tabloids or the ridiculous mainstream sites going on crusades against their games. They put their heads down, they work hard, and they put out good quality games that both critics and fans adore. Can they be hard? Yes. Can they be frustrating? Oh, yes indeed they can be. Can they also be the most rewarding games that I've ever played? Yes, and they are. And when I first heard about the games a decade ago, they didn't really sound like my cup of tea. Because I liked some challenge, but I don't like to beat my brains out with the challenge. And I thought that's what the games would be, but that's not really what they are. Even though, like I said, you can get frustrated with them. But the real reward is finally overcoming the challenges and beating these games that some people are still too scared to even try, simply because the game journalists tell them that it's too hard to play. Or maybe their friend said, oh, I tried, it's too hard to play. They're really not. And regardless, even if you don't like them, even if you never played them before, the thing that is undeniable is that every single game that From Software has put out in the last decade has been very well received by critics and players alike, and they're still played to this day. You can still go and play Dark Souls and find people playing it. You can play Dark Souls 2, there's still people playing it. Bloodborne, Dark Souls 3, sure they're not populated like they would be, but for games that are many years old at this point, the fact that you can still go in and find people to play with, and just last week I started playing with a friend of mine. He started playing Bloodborne for the first time, and we got through and beat the Cleric Beast together. And we had fun doing it. Okay, that's enough anecdotal evidence. But anyway, I think I've gotten my point across. Maybe you disagree. I'm sure many of you do. I'm sure you have a lot of other developers that you have in mind when you think back at your favorite developers of the last decade. And all this really is an invitation for a debate down in the comments. So please, let me know what you guys think. That's it for me, Coach Toolshed. Tell me, what is your favorite developer? Or maybe you agree with me. Maybe you think From Software is actually the best game developer for AAA gaming of the last decade. I would like to hear your arguments otherwise. Anyway, that's it from me. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. Please subscribe if you want to stay in tune with the channel headed forward. And as always, keep it turned to 11. Happy New Year's, y'all.